Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin's issued a new warning to countries that he feels are interfering in Ukraine. And also today, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres toured areas outside Kyiv that were destroyed during the Russian advance.
For the latest on the situation in Ukraine, let's go live right now to CTV's Omar Sachedina in Kyiv. Omar, thanks for joining us. We know that the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres was touring the areas outside of Kyiv, taking in all the damage that's been done. And he really wants Russia to face the war criminal court in the U.S., rather the UN. But we know that he's saying, you know, crimes against humanity, war itself is a crime. So what is he calling for? Because we know that if Russia is to be in court for war crimes, that's going to take a long time, actually.
Yeah, and we know that the International Criminal Court is investigating Russia for the possibility of war crimes, but you're right, that process could take some time because it obviously needs to gather evidence, even though it would appear that there is, Jennifer and Nick, preponderance of evidence already out there. But we were there when the UN Secretary-General toured those sites in Bucha and in Borodyanka. And Borodyanka, I mean, it is quite a stunning image. You know, we saw a park on one side of the street where children were playing, and then on the other side of the street you see two apartment buildings that have been destroyed, basically on the verge of collapse by Russian airstrikes. And so the UN Secretary-General went there. He also went to Bucha, where you'll recall that was a scene of that horrific and horrendous massacre, a massacre which, by the way, the Russians still say was staged or is fake, even though there's video evidence and satellite imagery that shows bodies strewn on the streets of that city. And behind a church called St. Andrew's, there was a mass burial site that was discovered where the UN Secretary-General was. Now, we did ask him whether there are any developments on the humanitarian corridor that he discussed with Vladimir Putin in his meeting with the Russian president just a couple of days ago. He did not take questions when he did tour those two sites. However, we know that he will be meeting with the Ukrainian president this evening, and we're told there will be a press conference after that meeting. But, you know, the Ukrainian president, Jennifer and Nick, has criticized the UN Secretary-General for visiting Moscow first and then coming here to Kyiv. So whether that will factor into the tone and tenor of this evening's conversations remains to be seen.
Yeah, that'll be something we'll definitely be watching for, Omar. In the meantime, you mentioned satellite images. We've seen some new satellite images from Mariupol today of the steel plant there continuing to be attacked and shelled by the Russian military here. And there's still 1,000 civilians and 2,000 soldiers in there. Is there any update on potentially getting at least the civilians out?
Yeah, and that's one of the questions that we asked the UN Secretary-General, because he has proposed what he calls a humanitarian contact group to allow officials from the United Nations, the Red Cross, Ukrainian and Russian soldiers to allow for the safe passage of those civilians. You'll recall, Nick, that just a couple of days ago, Russia had in fact proposed some kind of humanitarian corridor, but the Ukrainians believe that, you know, it wasn't good enough. The terms weren't good enough because they still felt that it would not be safe for the civilians to be able to leave that facility. So at last check, those civilians still remain inside. And we can't forget the fact that, you know, there are tens of thousands of civilians still trapped inside that strategic port city of Mariupol. And the reason that is significant is because now, you know, this is a city that has been choked off from water supply and you know, sewage as well. And so there is the risk of cholera, of dysentery, you know, increasingly unsanitary conditions on top of the intensified strikes that we've been seeing by the Russians. There are reports of at least 50 overnight. So it is an increasingly desperate situation, and not just in Mariupol, but we know in areas such as Kyiv that continues to be battered. That is Ukraine's second largest city. We know that the city of Kherson, which the Russians have now occupied, that has also been battered as well. And, you know, it's an interesting point. We are hearing from the Russians that as of Sunday, as of May 1st, that Ukrainian city, which is now occupied by the Russians, will be forced to use the ruble as their currency. So it shows you just how quickly the Russians are moving.
Yeah, that really shows that indeed. Okay, Omar Sachedina live in Kyiv. Thanks again, Omar. Appreciate the reporting.